Welcome everybody. My name is Steve Orr. I am the managing partner at Orr Group, and we welcome you here today to our continuing series of webinars. I will introduce the group, the outstanding group of folks that we have, that I have with me in just one second, but I did want to make a couple of introductory comments just to get us going. So I try to spare you from my own background in these discussions, but I thought I'd bore you with just a minute saying that I have more than 10 or 12 years on Wall Street as a finance person, investment banker type. And I say that because in the last 30 years, my wife and I started this company, Orr Group, and we've been working just with nonprofits. But I think the intersect at a time like this between that financial knowledge and what's going on and the impact it's having on our communities is relevant. So if you've been watching the stock market today, you know that it was a tough day, and a down day, as was yesterday. But generally, you'd have to say that the stock market and the markets generally are anticipating a comeback. They're telling us that, well, this is going to be a short-term economic calamity. That's debatable, of course, but the markets at least are telling us that. And the reason it's relevant for us is because our donors are watching this, and because our donors' wealth are typically tied up in the markets of one type or another. So if they're feeling better, which they are because the market has come back considerably from its lows, then I think we need to be aware of that. And that is highly relevant for the topic that we want to talk about today, which is capital campaigns. We've had several webinars now. We've talked about events. We spent a lot of time just on the PPP loans, which I hope you all are beneficiaries of. At this point, the Senate just passed, or about to pass in a matter of an hour, I think, the next version, the next tranche of money into that small business loan proposition. So if you didn't get the first round, I hope you are in line to get the second round. I do think that's been impactful, and I think it's fairly effective. You're hearing about some abuses, but I think generally that's helping the nonprofit industry. That's fantastic to see. So having said all that, the topic today is campaigns. If we look back just to February, most of us, organizations of size, let's say, are in the middle of or starting or at the conclusion of a capital campaign or an enhanced major gift program. So all of this, all of these discussions around using the tactics of a capital campaign, I think are highly relevant. And the question it always comes to now is, here we are in the middle of April, what do we do? It's impossible to accurately predict what will happen next with the economy and with the virus. But we can surely talk about tactics and advice that we are going to try to provide today on what you do with your capital campaign. So that's the topic. I do think it is a moment when donors have a little more time. We've been arguing communication with donors, whether you're actively making an ask, and probably not right this second, but communication in terms of how you're doing, what are you feeling, highly relevant right now. It's very impactful. And around campaigns, I think leaders of capital campaigns, as well as donors, would like to be asked their opinion of what do you think we should do right now? Do you think it's a good moment to become re-engaged? Do you like our case statement? Are you happy with that? Would you recommend any modifications? There are a number of things you're going to hear from us today that we hope will be helpful in your thinking around that. So having said that, as usual, we want you to be focused, if you will, on positioning your questions on the Q&A function. The chat we'll see, but the Q&A is better, and we try to get to most of those. We'll highlight those along the way as we were discussing things, because we like to hear what you have to say. So let me introduce our outstanding panelists here today, and this is the most fun for me of doing these webinars, is that we get to showcase our amazing talent. So here we go. Craig Shelley, I'll start with you because you're in the lower left-hand corner of my screen. Craig has been here with us for 7 years. He comes from a very strong leadership position at Boy Scouts. He's actually doing a number of these webinars, so you probably see him everywhere these days. He's a media star. But at our firm, he's been here, as I say, 7 years. He's been managing a number of the campaigns that we're doing and major gift programs in particular. So he's got a lot to say about, what you might be want to think about right now. He's also on the executive committee of the AFP in New York, and that puts him in touch with an awful lot of leaders. Kelly Dunphy's been involved with a few of these webinars, and she's been with our firm 13 plus or minus years. She's managing director, of course. Kelly's a very strategic person, so we have her as head of our strategy. We do a lot of strategic planning, development planning, campaign planning, and restructuring, and Kelly is at the forefront of all of that. She has a long career of managing actively capital campaigns, and then she's formerly from Share Our Strength. And a relative newcomer, Becca Bennett. Becca is a senior vice president with us. She also manages a number of campaigns right now and outsourced development assignments for us. She comes to us having held 2 previous director of development positions. So she comes with that, that knowledge, which is very helpful. So let's jump right in. Again, direct your questions to Q&A, please. The big question: should we pause our campaign, or should we, move it ahead full blast? One thing I will remind us, that campaigns are typically set up as a multi-year enterprise. And what does that mean? It means that there are going to be down economic years, through the process. So there's really nothing extraordinary or unusual about the fact that we're not, 100% of the time in strong economic environments. So I would just put that as a contextual issue to think about. If you're hearing rain pounding on my windows, you'll know in Long Island it is pouring. So Kelly, with that, I will turn it over to you, and I will go on mute for a minute.
Sure. Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about, what to do depending on where you are in your campaign. And I just wanted to respond to, I think, the first question we got. When we say campaign, we're talking about, it could be a capital campaign, an endowment campaign, or a comprehensive campaign where you're, it's an all-in approach, and plan giving as well, which actually we'll talk about much later on. So we're using the campaign term in a wide-ranging way. But when we think about where you are in your campaign, I think there are different considerations to take into account to determine what you should do and what kind of pause or how you might need to recalibrate your timing. So just first, let's talk about really quick defining those 4 stages. First is a feasibility study, usually about 3 to 4 months, where you take some time to assess your strengths and areas of weaknesses that could impact the success of your campaign. Then you have what we call a readiness phase. That could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Some organizations don't need to go to a readiness phase, but this is where you could address any areas of weakness, shore up your staffing and systems, finalize your case, and begin to recruit your campaign leadership. Then you have, of course, I think most of us know, the quiet phase, where that's about 12 to 24 months, focused on your largest lead gifts for the campaign and your major gifts. And then lastly, the public or more community phase, which can last anywhere from 1 to 3 years. This is the big public launch, where you go out to the wider community and a broader base of constituencies. So like I said, there's different considerations in each of those phases. So let's dive into feasibility study phase, or planning study. I think the reality is you may want to put this off for a couple months as we continue to come out the other side of the more acute phase of the pandemic, and the economic picture and forecast will become a little clearer, hopefully in another month or 2. And why is that important? Because when you're going into these feasibility or planning studies, that's your moment to sit down with donors and do some interviews with donors to get a sense of how they're feeling about your case for support, your organization in general, and also their ability to support and interest in supporting the institution during a campaign. And so whereas your organization will have a clearer picture on the economic forecast and how it impacts you, they'll have a clearer picture on how it's impacting them and be able to give you a clear sense of how they might feel about supporting the campaign. But I would say don't delay it much longer than a couple months, because you'll learn a lot by doing that. Also, who your potential leadership candidates are. Do you have enough qualified donors? Is your staff, at the capacity you would need for a campaign? On the other hand, if you've recently completed a feasibility study, what you learned from those interviews is probably a little out of date now. So you might want to consider going back to those donors who participated in those interviews and checking in with them. You know, how are they doing? How has their situation changed? And take what you learn and figure out, you know, how you might need to recalibrate your timing and just pause the launch for a little bit. So those are some of the considerations around a feasibility study. With the readiness phase, you know, based on the results of your planning effort, you may have found that you need this kind of readiness period to shore up some elements of your fundraising operation. So you could still take this time now to finalize your case. I mean, there's a rare, I think, occasion where you're 100% satisfied with your case for support. So this is a great time to spend some more time on strengthening that case. Have conversations with your leadership candidates to assess, you know, their willingness to be involved. Go deep on cultivating your donors. We've been talking a lot on our webinars about the importance of donor communication right now. I see it in all sorts of articles and other webinars as well. This is the time to be talking to donors and taking those cultivation steps. So do not stop that in any way. And then also a good time to get your systems in order. You know, is your database serving you? Do you need to do some cleanup before you're ready for a campaign? Do you have all the research tools you need? Is your news management process working for you? All those kinds of things. This is a great time to get all of that in order while you might have paused a launch for your campaign.
So Craig, in delving into the quiet and public phase discussion, one of the questions I just got recently was, you know, we're not ready to secure the very largest donors, which we clearly would want to do in a quiet phase. Everyone knows about the project. Should we jump directly to a public phase, you know, in an environment like this? So if in the context of your discussion, if you would touch on that one too, it'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, there's opportunities at any phase of the campaign you're in, for sure, as Kelly talked about. But, you know, the quiet and public phase are, you know, I tend to think of them almost together as sort of the most active phase, right? Like that's where you're out recruiting and doing lots of things. That's where, you know, it doesn't make sense for you to sort of walk away or stop, right? If you woke up this morning and what you were doing was important enough to be raising money 3 months ago, then it's important enough to be raising money now. But to your issue, Steve, around like quiet, public, do you jump right to public? I've always struggled in recent years with this whole idea of quiet and public, because I kind of think in many instances, it doesn't make sense to spend a whole lot of time just in the quiet phase. Now, again, certain institutions, you're going to only build something brand new if you have a certain amount of money. You're going to do something dramatically different. You're not so sure if you're really going to do the campaign. Lots of things like that. There are reasons to do the quiet phase. But a lot of times I think of it in terms of, you know, when Apple has a new iPhone, they don't just try and sell it quietly to a few people to start, right? Like if you have a great idea, it behooves you to have as many people as possible understanding it, getting involved in it, and they're going to want to be on that team, right? So that's sort of generally, I have no problem with people that think, hey, a lot of people know about this already. Should we go right to the public phase? Yes. Oftentimes I'll counsel that in regular situations. So for sure now it makes sense. But I do think in these phases, you're going to slow down, right? Like, so the relationships with donors right now are about to get longer, right? So you can ask for money now. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But if you're in a quiet phase and you've committed to that idea, it may make sense to stay quiet a little bit longer, but that doesn't mean you're not talking to your donors, right? You do that in a quiet phase. It doesn't mean you're not, where appropriate, soliciting gifts. You do that in a quiet phase. So I think that's all okay. If you're already in the public phase, same thing. Maybe it just got a little bit longer. And I think you have to calibrate your messaging, right? So if you're public, your messaging is a little bit different, though you probably have to calibrate it either way. But if you're public, you have a lot more sort of public-facing websites and materials and brochures. You have to calibrate that message to now and sort of what's been the impact of this pandemic on you? How has it changed your ambitions? You know, you don't have to have a specific response to this crisis. Like if that's not what you do, that's not what you do. But you've been impacted by it somehow. So that messaging has to calibrate. And you do have to understand where your donors are, right? I'm not sort of naive enough to say, you know, charge full speed ahead and just ask anybody and everybody for money, right? Some people have been affected by this very differently. I think when we talk about how to ask people for money, I think it's important to understand where they're coming from, as it always is, before you ask. And so, but I have you can move forward on these phases, and there's no question in my mind. And we're seeing it active. Campaigns are active right now, and they're securing gifts all the time.
One of the really valuable parts, of course, about the quiet phase is that you'd like to get your largest gifts lined up. You'd like to start at the top of the pyramid and move down. And if you miss that opportunity, and maybe these days, because of what's going on right now, as Craig, you're saying, partly, you might have to jump right to a public, but there is super value in trying to diligently plod through a quiet phase and get those large gifts. And, if you're asking for a 7-figure gift and you miss the opportunity to secure the 8-figure gift in a very large campaign, it's going to make the 7-figure ask much tougher. And you don't have your leadership set up, to where it's the logical step then to use those gifts to leverage the next level. That's going to be tough. But I have to say, there's compelling arguments.
Well, and I would say, I'm presupposing you've probably done your lead gifts. If you haven't, you can certainly do this right now, right? Like there is no reason. I know a lot of people are hesitant to solicit like this. You can. People are now comfortable enough with it. 3 weeks ago, no, but we're in a new world every week, it seems. So I think if people are close to you and it's been cultivated correctly, you can solicit really large gifts in this sort of form of, on video.
Let's spend just 2 seconds on the case statement. I am finding with a lot of my clients, Craig, you probably are too, where, this is a moment to step back a minute and say, okay, let's take a closer look at the case statement because it wasn't resonating as well as I'd liked. I'm getting reaction, positive here, negative here. What's your feeling about case statement work in this right now?
It's a great time to work on it, no matter what the situation, because I've yet to meet anybody who thinks their case is perfect, right? Everybody wants to improve it. Nobody thinks it's quite there. It's not landing there. Like it's one of these things that, you never quite have right. So yes, take your time and work on it. But I also think this is where sort of your tone and your place in the world and what this all is going to mean for you really comes into play, right? So look at your case, right? If you're building a new hospital, how is that hospital better preparing your community for pandemics like this? If you're, extending programming outside the school day, how have you now done this in a virtual way and become such a more valuable asset to families as they try and do it? So think of your case through the lens of what you're doing right now. And on the opposite side too, right? There maybe you leaned heavy on, hey, we're making new classrooms as part of our campaign to expand the university. Well, you're probably thinking about your need for class space much differently than you were 4 weeks ago. And even if you're not, it's going to be tone deaf to pretend like your greatest need is more classrooms when you're every day proving maybe you don't need any classrooms, right? So I think you have to calibrate your case of what's going on here, but every case can get improved, and now's a great time to do it, and a great time to test it with people, right? 1, you get wonderful feedback. 2, they get bought into your team, right? So people generally, I'm finding, are accessible to meeting, taking calls, talking, saying, hey, we're tweaking our case for this campaign you've been helping me out with. Would you mind taking a look at this? Or we're thinking about a campaign. I've been planning around this case. Would you mind taking a look at this? So, sort of the feasibility and planning piece that Kelly talked on. In some ways, it's difficult to get a good answer right now about somebody's giving perspective, which is an important part of that process. But it's a great time to get their feedback on other parts of it, and it's a great time to get access to them. So there's lots of, I think this is a good time for casework.
Right, and we were going to touch on campaign leadership, and I think you've touched on a lot of those points where, let's go and spend extra time with those that we're expecting to lead this thing. And it might be casework, and it might just be how you doing, how you feeling about the world generally, that whole communication piece. I mean, I am talking with so many people every day about what is going on in the world, and they really enjoy speaking about it. And it gives us the opportunity to pull it back to our mission and make it relevant, as you were saying, to what is going on in our world. I can tell you for sure that we're working on a couple of very, very large, billion-dollar kind of campaigns, and we are still actively, Craig, we're working together on that, pulling together advisory boards and leadership. It's short of asking, it's long on, sphere of influence conversations. What can you bring to it? How can we organize you better? What materials should we be working on now to prepare you? Those are all activities, that are extremely valuable in this kind of environment when we're not doing as much direct asking. But speaking of asking, Becca, I'm coming to you now. There's a lot of views on should we be aggressively asking for money right now? I've heard more people than I would have ever expected say, I think it's inappropriate, and I'm kind of embarrassed to ask for anything but something that's directly related to the problems everyone sees, immediately in front of us. I'm not sure how to think about that. Becca, I know we're going to get some brilliance on your side of that, but how do you approach the whole question of, is it time to ask or not?
I think there's really a two-pronged approach to this. It's what are we doing in this moment right now? And then when you get to the point where it is appropriate to ask, how do you do that? So like much of what we've already heard related to case development and establishing your campaign leadership, I think that this is a really good moment to recalibrate and reprioritize your campaign prospects. Though we might caution around making large asks in this moment right now, this is a good time to be preparing for the future, similar to a lot of what we've already been hearing. So take a look at your gift table. Do you still have the right prospects at each gift level, or do you need to qualify additional prospects to meet your campaign goals? And it's important to especially pay attention to those leadership gifts. When planning to solicit lead gifts, you may need to delay the ask until we see the market steady. But especially to Craig's point, for those organizations that have already done the campaign feasibility and the readiness phase, and they're in that quieter public phase of their work, you've already gotten a vested interest from a lot of your lead donors. They understand why your campaign is important and how it's going to be transformational. They're excited about kind of throwing themselves at the work that you're doing. So rather than shifting or reducing the ask to some of these lead donors, just be prepared to be flexible with them and be creative with them so that they can continue to give in a way that is important to them and important to your organization. So that might mean, for example, that rather than structuring your campaign around a 3 to 5 year pledge payment cycle, you're extending that timeline to a 5 to 7 year cycle so that donors, again, can continue to give at those leadership gift levels, but you're extending the timeline for when that gift will be received. Another thing that you can do, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is you can look to levering blended gifts and planned giving to really help your donors meet their goals. But it's generally just really important that you continue to talk to them about what their giving priorities might look like and how that aligns with your campaign work.
So Becca, there's a question here about, it's from a healthcare organization, and they have donors coming and saying, how can I help you in a COVID way? And, if the campaign is not specifically about COVID, should they change, and sort of be responsive to that and ask for money just for the COVID? What's your opinion on that?
I think that there are a lot of ways that you could respond to that. I think that, front and foremost, it's important that your donors are understanding what your needs are. Are you responding to COVID? Is there an avenue for you to, do good with those monies? And if so, to Craig's point, there might be a shift in your case for support that you're making, and there might be room, and there likely is room, to take a gift to address what's happening in this moment right now. I would just encourage everybody to continue to talk to their donors and their supporters about the long-term needs in addition to the present needs for their organizations.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we are all marketing in orientation, personable people, and we surely want to take the interest someone has in a COVID-specific solution. And if that's really what they want to do, we should, help them use their funds in a valuable way if our organization provides those kinds of services. But I also think, we can, and we deserve it. Our mission deserves us to move the conversation closer to, well, here's what would really be helpful for us. And, I think most people are really aware and accommodating to that issue. So Becca, can you also comment just generally on communication ideas? We actually in previous seminars or webinars have talked a bunch about the importance of communication, the tactics, the things that we might want to consider. But in the context of capital campaigns, what are your ideas on communicating?
Yeah, communicating in a capital campaign in this moment right now isn't a whole lot different than your regular campaign communications. You should start really by focusing on your donors, checking in on them, seeing how their families are doing, inquire how their businesses might have been impacted in this time, and really empathize and recognize that their financial positions may have changed. In addition to checking in on them, you want to be providing an update and, being open and honest about where you are and where your organization is. How have you been impacted by COVID-19? What are you doing in response? Have there been adjustments to your campaign priorities? And what does that timeline for the campaign look like now? Kind of going back to a lot of the points that we've discussed earlier. And then from there, you're really able to cultivate and foster a communication and get these prospects and donors buy-in. And this doesn't need to be something that is a single touch point. It should really be happening, we've been home for 6 weeks. It could be happening really over an extended period of time. And you can also lean on not just your organizational leadership, but your campaign leadership to participate in these conversations. People who are also invested in your organization and in your campaign are really well positioned to be reaching out on your behalf. And then in addition to that, as you're looking to expanding that communication, you can bring in your broader audience by doing a virtual webinar like we're doing right now. And I think that those kind of standard communications really bring everybody into the fold so they understand what the need is, and it puts you in a position where you can ask if somebody is ready to have a conversation around their campaign commitment, and then you can make that ask as well.
Right. In that context, there's a question about, okay, communication's really great, and we're doing a wonderful job there, but my CEO and my CFO in particular, the finance person, wants those asks to be made now. Kelly, how do you respond to, the pressure that we all feel, to ask for the money now, but, kind of weighing the sensitivities that we all are experiencing?
Yeah, I saw that question and asking specifically for, are there sort of experts or articles that you could bring to your leaders and show them this? And yes, there are. I think you could find a lot online. However, I think another way to do this to make it real for them is to bring them along on some donor conversations and donor virtual meetings, right? And so they're hearing directly from a donor where their head is at right now and the reservations they might have, and that while their interest and support in general the organization hasn't waned, their just ability to make a gift right now is not happening. So I just think if you can make it real for them and experience it firsthand, they might get it. Hopefully.
And by the way, they might be the better one to make the ask.
Correct.
Because they're imploring the donor to help us where we really see the need. Mm-hmm. Our audience is one step away from COVID, we might think, but in fact, they are being impacted in a major way. We really need your help and we need it now. So that might be a good outcome if that person, I wouldn't bring the CFO with you on that. I'd bring the CEO on that.
But I also think, like, to the person that asked that question, I think, in some degree, like, I'm probably not entirely sympathetic to your report. Like, I kind of see where the CEO and CFO are coming from, and there are people that are going to be ready to ask. Like, to Steve's point, like, there are people that are incredibly impacted by this, and I think what Becca was getting at is understanding where your prospects are, right? Like, understanding how this is impacting them, right. Help them understand how this is impacting your organization. You'll know if the time's right for an ask. Do not go and ask somebody for money who owns a chain of restaurants or hotels, or, they're on the or they're 3 people in their family have been infected. But there are people out there that you can ask, and right. So, like, I do think maybe you just need to find the right people to ask. Like, your CEO and CFO are giving you sort of a blanket, like, go ask everybody. No, that's not the answer. But there are people out there that can be asked, and you need to. So.
Here's a question that's great. You probably all saw this. Since everyone's at home, is this a good time to generate and share video content, even if it's not of high quality? And that begs the question, what kind of video are you thinking of preparing at home to support your case? I don't want to go too deep into that question, but does anyone have a response for that?
I don't think it's ever a really great time to do low quality video or any sort of personal home videos, as Steve's alluding to. But I do think it's a great time for content, right? Like, there is, I was talking to somebody the other day who I respect a lot on this subject, and they said, as the world is evolving, like, getting people's attention is going to be more difficult, right? Like, I could go right now and, have dinner with my daughter on the other side of this wall, right? So, like, my choices are much more like, harder to make. So I do think you're going to need better content, whether those are videos you shoot in your home this week, probably not. But over time, like content content has been king is like a sort of a thing in the wider media world. I think it's going to come home pretty hard in nonprofits as we get through the other side of this, of like, you really got to catch my attention. I'm not looking to just sort of humor you. Like, I need good content to be drawn in. So there's something to that.
Yeah, it makes me think that I wouldn't worry too much about production quality these days. I mean, look at, any television show you turn
Right, look
on.
at the news. Right.
Yeah, the correspondent is sitting at home and it's all blurry, and I don't think that's really the issue. The question I had is more, what can we really say about our mission at a nonprofit? We don't have the kids there, we don't have the patients there. Now, if you're in a hospital, that's a different matter. Okay, so there's a question here about public-private partnerships. And they're asking about, how do you probably, manage the cross-cultural issues, terrains in an environment like this? Pretty challenging. Anyone have an insight for that one? Everyone's suddenly frozen.
I think you're going to see, I think you're going to see organizations like that need money more than ever. Right? Like, there's sort of this downstream government funding problem that's coming fast, right? Because like tax bases are going to be totally screwed up, and local governments, states, cities are required to balance their budget. So they're not just going to be able to spend their way out of this. So a lot of organizations that have been like sort of these public-private partnerships with a lot of public funding, and the philanthropy is sort of the nice to have. Those funding models are going to get turned pretty quickly, pretty hard upside down. So I mean, that's sort of the only thing I'm sort of conscious of lately.
Well, one thing that
could be the impact.
One thing that dawns on me in a cross-cultural, multi-geographic kind of conversation is the world is all experiencing a similar phenomena here. So, it's not like this is exclusive to us or exclusive to Spain or Africa for that matter. So, it's a concern that we can talk globally about with anyone. And so I don't know what your particular cause is, and if the World Bank or UN is involved, I'm not sure of the peculiarities of that. But there's a conversation to be had clearly in the same way that we're conversing with anyone in the United States. So I would say there's that. So there's a couple questions coming in around planned giving. So Kelly, why don't we dive in there a little bit? Just as a preface to that conversation, as a firm, Orr Group has spent a lot of time in the last 2 or 3 years learning everything we find there is to know about planned giving, because in the post 2008-9 era, we found that planned giving became as important as it was previous, but it really became the focus of major donors, particularly, the multimillionaires and the billionaire types, because they're concerned about their estates. There's $68 trillion. That number, $68 trillion, moving from one generation to the next, projected over the next 25 years. That, needless to say, is an enormous number. And it's about 5 times what the number was just, 5 to 10 years ago. So wealth creation has been enormous. There's a lot of interest in giving planned gifts. In the wake, again, of 2008-9, that was a long period of time, perhaps as we'll experience this time, with insecurity really dominating, a major donor's psyche. They want to give, they want to be as charitable as they always have been, but they're uncertain about their investments. They're uncertain about their family. What can I leave to my family? Those types of thoughts. But then when I think about the end of life and I think about my will, okay, I surely have room, at the end of life to put something as a bequest into a will, or I have the wherewithal of buying a life insurance policy that will benefit the endowment, of my favorite college. There's a lot of technique, and the tax code, is incredibly kind to planned giving, charitable planned giving. So that's just a preface, but Kelly, you are our in-house expert on this. Why don't you just discuss what you see as far as planned giving?
Yes. So I saw an article last week or the week before in USA Today saying that estate attorneys are seeing a spike in interest from people who want to create their wills or update their estate plans. Freewill.com is getting a spike in interest. So, historically, as we noted, this interest in estate planning and thus planned giving as a vehicle in estate planning tends to rise during an economic downturn because donors still really do want to help, even if their access to cash right in this moment has, diminished. I think, this is really relevant for campaigns because it's what we've been seeing over the last 10 years or so, the trend of incorporating planned giving into campaign goal setting can really drive more aspirational goals for your campaign by including outright gifts and planned giving in the form of blended gifts. And it helps donors have that impact now as well as in the future after their passing. And it's a really nice donor-centric model and a more robust approach to asking a donor for a major gift tied to a campaign. And especially right now where even, more so donors are maybe more hesitant to part with an outright gift or as large of an outright gift, would be much more open to a conversation about how to incorporate planned giving to try to either maintain their commitment or maintain or reach the ask that you're making of them through incorporating planned giving to help them get there. I saw an interesting tactic where, if you make a gift or an ask now for a campaign gift with a blended approach, you could have some understanding with the donor that, okay, this is the framework now, let's say $1 million in an outright gift plus, $3 million in an estate plan. Can we come back to you in 6 months or 12 months and revisit what that looks like once, you may feel more confident about your financial position to, maybe shift more of that into an larger outright gift now. So I thought that was really interesting too, to try to have that, put that out there right now with the donor and see if they're interested in doing that. But, planned giving is a great fallback tool with campaign asks as well. If you have a donor who you'd like to ask, let's say for a $5 million gift, you think, based on your research, they've never made a gift of that size before. You're not quite sure how they'll respond. You make the ask for $5 million. And let's say they say, well, I can do $2 million. Say thank you, of course, number one, that's very generous of them. But then also ask if they've considered how an estate gift could help them get to that $5 million commitment through a blended model. And then we can recognize them at that, $5 million level. So they're recognized for the totality of their gift, both, what will have an impact now as well as in the future. And I mean, donors are so intrigued by that approach and that proposition. We're using it in campaigns all the time, and it can be really successful. So, I think right now being really open to incorporating planned giving into your campaign and your gift conversations, making sure that you as an organization are set up to accept planned gifts, how you're going to value them and count them. Are your gift acceptance policies amenable to those kinds of gifts? Those are the things to be looking at right now so you're prepared to do that.
So Becca, I know I'm going to ask everyone to comment on campaigns that we're working on now. Becca, you're working on one for a school where the endowment comes into play, scholarships come into play, and planned giving is a major part of that. So what's been your experience well, not necessarily this environment, but just generally in planned giving to that end?
Yeah. For that campaign in particular, about 50% of the dollars that have been raised to date have come in through planned giving, and we're seeing a huge uptick in participation through the blended giving model. And I think to Kelly's point, and something that we were talking about earlier around case development, this is a moment where it's difficult to talk about capital improvements or what you're doing in a locker room or on a football field, but you can always talk about your need to sustain, in this case, a school or your organization's health, and that's often done through your endowment, which is really nicely fit with planned giving and the planned giving models that Kelly has established. So I think as we're looking towards what we're doing in the future in response to COVID-19 and what the apps will be looking like down the line, planned giving is one area where we really are continuing to stay the course with the asks that we're making to our donors.
Here's a question. I have a major donor that's made $1 million estate commitment, and this person is sure that the net worth, has taken a hit, no doubt, although it's coming back. We have a call scheduled. Should we ask for the commitment or just use that call to chat and strengthen the relationship? Anybody have a view on that, Craig?
Yeah, sure. I think it has less to do with their assets or the hit they've taken in the market, and more to do where they are in the stage of your cultivation, right? Like, if it was right to ask them for a gift for $1 million right now, 2 weeks ago, I think that's still right, particularly because you're asking for a planned gift. Right? There's no sort of savvy investor that anticipates that this will last forever, right? So if it's a planned gift, it's way actually easier for me to say yes because it's longer out, right? So yes, if they're ready to be asked, I would make the ask. I think a thing that I'm trying to be very careful about right now, and I think you see it in some of these questions starting to come up. Most people, not me, I like to ask people for money. Most people don't like to ask people for money, and they will find reasons, sometimes valid, sometimes not to do it. The world has given them a very, very good reason to say no. So I think we have to we have to work around that, right? If the person is right to be asked, they're right to be asked, and you can move forward with that. So yeah, I would make that ask, but again, especially because it's a planned gift, I would definitely make that ask.
And there are a number of askers who are naturally hesitant to ask for money anyway, as you indicated, and find this time to be a great excuse not to be aggressive and ask for money. So, we're all as fundraisers, I think we all understand that. And, this is a sensitive moment. So if it's somebody who's been impacted by COVID-19 or for any of the obvious reasons, it's not a good time. But generally, people are going to, I love one of you, I don't know if you said it this call, but you said it in the previous call, let's ask if it's okay to ask. That's a nice notion. Is it all right if I approach you for a gift right now, or would you rather have me approach you a month from now? Simple way of.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can have them understand what you're trying to do as an organization and what your needs are, and then be very candid of like, obviously we have a need to still be raising money. I would love to ask you to consider a gift. Would you be okay with that? I mean, we did that an organization just a week ago, largest gift they've ever solicited. We haven't got an answer yet, but it was very clear to me. She said yes, you can ask me for a gift, and we sent forward the information to ask for this gift. And I'd be shocked if she doesn't make a gift larger than she's ever made before, right? So, yeah, I do like that sort of tactic, which I'm confident I stole from somebody else, but I think it's a good idea.
One thing I thought I'd touch a bit more on, Kelly, you mentioned the blended gift, and we are using this aggressively in every one of our campaigns. And I think if you look out there and you look at all the universities and hospitals in particular that are launching or have launched or in the middle of $1 billion campaign, you scratch your head and you say, how in the world could they raise $1 billion, or Harvard raised $9 billion as they did over 10 years? Well, the way they're doing it is this blended gift approach. And that is that it includes a very substantial part of the ask, of a very large ask, will be planned giving. It's just plain and simple. And by the way, when I talk about these big numbers, this is equally applicable to a $10 million campaign or a $25 million campaign or something less. It's the whole notion is, as Kelly says, exactly right. If we think someone is capable of a $250,000 ask, we might want to dare to ask them for $1 million. And then we'll hear the response from them saying, oh, I can't give you $1 million, but I can give you $250,000 over the next 5 years, $50,000 a year. We say, thank you, that's fantastic. And oh, by the way, that's what we expected. But now you enter into the second part of the conversation is, well, there's a naming opportunity at the 7-figure number. How could we get you there? Would planned giving be a route? And you'd be amazed how relatively inexpensive it is to buy a $750,000 life insurance policy, and pay it over 10 years, pay the premiums over 10 years. It's not that much. And if your gift acceptance policy accommodates life insurance policies, typically for people over 55 years old, boom, you've created a gift that will count towards the marketing of your campaign. Your auditors won't allow you to take all of that up front, recognize all of that up front, but you will be able to recognize that in your capital campaign numbers. So that is how, my friends, those numbers are getting to such large numbers. So Kelly, you want to add to that? You're shaking your head. Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I'm sure there's always exceptions to everything, but there's really very few reasons to not ask somebody for a blended gift as part of the campaign. We've worked with organizations where their plan giving program, either they didn't have one or it was nascent, right? They were doing very little, or they had just started it. And tying a plan giving strategy into your campaign is an excellent way to really either kickstart or add a lot of life into your plan giving program. And the other thing I would just add is that I don't want to go into all the details here, but there's such a wide variety of plan giving vehicles that can relate to any number of donors' potential needs or interests, whether they are interested in life income, a trust that pays them
Right.
income annually for the rest of their life, and then the remainder goes to the charity, or there's tax reasons that they want to set something up. There's such a variety of vehicles out there that if your organization works with estate experts, can help you in collaboration with the donor figure out what's right for them, and there's always a benefit to the organization as well.
Here's a question that's a little off topic from what we're talking about, but it's relevant to what we talked about a couple webinars ago. We got our PPP loan. Should we talk about it? Is it something that we're proud of and we want to speak with donors about, or is it something that we feel badly about because there is negative news now on some bigger organizations that are sort of inappropriately, taking these funds? Any views on that one?
I wouldn't feel bad, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pound your chest about it either, right? Like you have nothing to be ashamed of, but I don't think you need to be out there bragging about it. I mean, donors that want to look at your finances and care about it, they'll see that in your cash flow and whatnot, and you should discuss it with them. But
The one
I
thing
wouldn't send out a press release.
Yeah, right. The one thing it does do, though, as the questioner is also alluding to, it does say positive things about your organization, because I believe the ones who did not get it the first round, who were interested in applying and getting, were either too late or, and hopefully now that problem will be remedied with a second tranche of money coming in. But the other is that it was a tricky form. I looked at it, and there were a lot of decisions to be made about what's included, how to calculate all this stuff. If you got it early on, it means you're pretty smart and you were successful, and that's something to be proud of. As a smaller organization, as we all are in the industry of nonprofits. So it's a tricky landscape, but I think on a one-on-one conversation, it would be an appropriate thing if it helps you raise the next the next dollar. So then there's a question. Speaking of naming opportunities, I wonder how these might look. What it might look like in a post-COVID environment. I imagine the offers pre and post-COVID would be strikingly different. No, I don't know, folks. Do we change our naming opportunities because of COVID? Becca, let's hear what you have to say.
I don't know that I would. Specifically looking at it from a campaign lens, a part of your feasibility and your readiness phase is to look to where you need those dollars most, what naming opportunities exist, and like what the cost is going to be, either if it's for a capital improvement to do that construction, or what the value is that you see is attributed to that naming opportunity. And likely you've already begun discussions with some of your donors around those opportunities and secured some of those gifts. So I think that if you've already kind of developed that framework, it's really appropriate to stay the course and lean towards some of the plan giving models that we've already talked about to help people elevate their giving and kind of meet those opportunities.
Craig, you look like you have a view on that one.
Naming opportunity is still going to be a thing, right? I don't think egos are going to disappear after this. So people still, naming opportunities are still going to resonate with people, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I think the bigger gifts with naming opportunities, they should be primarily reserved for, something of substance, that you still have the same need and you need it to be funded. So I wouldn't change them. There's one here. Yeah, interesting. So family members, we all try to involve, if we can, particularly in a larger gift and a planned gift, family members in that gift. I have an example. We made a $10 million ask, and the person was receptive, but said, I've never really talked to my family about that level of giving. First of all, they don't know that we could even make that size of gift. And secondly, they just, having that kind of wherewithal, I haven't really talked to the family about how we want to be charitable. So I think it is really smart to involve family members in charity. And I think, in the context of COVID, kids see, what's going on in the world the same way everyone else does. I was around my 6-year-old grandson, and he's saying, he's calling everything this illness and that illness. And while I think it's premature to involve a 6-year-old in charity, I'm just saying, teenagers, college kids, they're deeply concerned about what's going on in the world. So sure, get them involved. And I think it's a really smart avenue to go down in anything charity. Becca, you have anything to add on that one?
I think the only thing I would add is that by involving your family at the front end of the conversation, it's a really nice way to combine a number of different assets and really increase a family gift. So an individual might be able to give, $250,000, but across various family members, you might be able to get a 7-figure gift commitment out of a family.
So here's a question. We're in a quiet phase of a $100 million campaign slated for the public launch in August. Is 70% of goal still the best metric to use in thinking about timing of launch? I don't think there's anything magic about 70% or 50%. To me, it has more to do with how many of my major prospects have committed. Because if I have the largest gifts committed, I'm going to be able to leverage that in many, many ways. Kelly, what do you say on that one?
Yeah, I would say, how many of your lead and major donors are still waiting to be asked, right? And if, you still have a number of them, or maybe they've told you, look, I can't make a commitment right now, talk to me again in 3 months or so, and there's enough of a group of people saying that, you might want to consider extending your quiet phase by a bit longer. Now, I don't know if you're a school or what kind of organization you are, and if August is relevant because it's the start of the next school year, of course, you might want to think about definitely how that timing would play out if you needed to delay it from there. But I would say, take a look at your prospect pool and see how many candidates are still left, and if it's worth pushing out the quiet phase a bit longer.
Craig, anything to add on that one?
No, I'd agree. No, I'm 100% on board with you guys. No, you should not. Should we get to 70% before we go public? All right, Steve, I wasn't on the screen. They could only see the person that was talking. You sort of blew up my spot here.
Yes, I did. I thought I'd call you out. Okay, we had a good one here. By the way, we only have maybe 5 or 6 minutes left, so if you have a question, please throw it in. We have a person who's asking about a gala context, and how dare your donors say that they want their money back? We're hearing very little of that, frankly. We're hearing most people saying, I get it. Now if someone's really in financial need, that would be a different situation, but let's try to apply that question to campaigns. If someone made a commitment and they're really in a financial space that they just can't follow through on the commitment, what do you do? Anyone have an answer on that one?
Well, I think first is to figure out, as an organization, how much leeway you might have in being able to defer when pledge payments are due, and that will come down to your own, cash situation. But number one, I would say always try to work with the donor. I mean, the question is, can they not fulfill the pledge ever? Or can they not fulfill their currently due pledge payment, right? And so even without being in this economic downturn, I think in any campaign, there are donors who run into their own personal economic challenges where they need to have this kind of conversation with you and defer for a year, extend the payment plan, whatever it might be. And of course, we want to be able to work with a donor on that. But before you have that conversation with donor, understand organizationally what you can stand as well.
So I think we can wrap it up because we've answered all your questions. But thank you. And I would just say, you know, it's difficult, I have to say, in these times to constantly present a positive face and be uplifting and, you know, positive in your thinking and in your conversations with donors and with your, you know, with your staff and with your board. But I think, you know, as we are all leaders, we must do that. And, you know, we're all still working virtually. We're sitting in our own homes. Hopefully that's not a bad thing, but it's tough to, you know, remain 100% professional and all of that. So I am going to be optimistic and say we will come out of this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And in the context of capital campaigns, I really think it's smart to keep going, make these shifts, you know, be entrepreneurial about your conversations, about the tactics, about the things you're going to work on right now. Use this time, frankly, to get organized. You know, usually we're moving so fast in the December, January, February period that there are some folks who are saying, oh my gosh, at least I have some time now to get my database together and to get, you know, to do more research on individual donors and to set profiles and, you know, get my sales force in order and stuff like that. So it's we're going to plow ahead as if things are going to improve tomorrow. And I think that's a good attitude to have. And I think it will be something that your donors will actually appreciate. So with that, you can reach any of us if you go on our website, orrgroup.com. You'll be able to find our direct email information and such. And we appreciate you participating with us today. And if you have ideas for future webinars, we are always happy to hear about that. And we will be sending out a survey. So we really do read those carefully. So please be generous in your comments, good, bad, and ugly. With that, have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.